Well, welcome everybody to another episode of After the Tassel podcast. Today we have a special guest, Dr. Joe Ashley, who is from Richmond, Virginia, but also a class of 1974 whose major was in psychology and he minored in natural and social sciences. He is a doctor of rehabilitation and was a member of Sigma Alpha Epsilon fraternity while he was here at campus. He was also a recently awarded the Alumni Achievement Award here a couple weeks ago. And Joe has been characterized as a blind man with vision. He has achieved significant accomplishments in his field, as well as remarkable triumphs over personal obstacles. He started the uncertain journey into blindness during his time at Westminster, where he received a great deal of help and support from his fraternity brothers, college faculty, and staff. Joe has spent over 30 years creating vocational rehabilitation services to enhance the choices and opportunities for individuals with disabilities to live, work, and thrive in their communities. He is known for his collaborative work across service systems such as vocational rehabilitation, special education, career and technical education, and workforce. All had the main focus of employment, with business engagement being an important part of the effort. Currently working as a consultant affords him the opportunity to collaborate with state agencies and universities on grant-funded research and initiatives focusing on recovery and retaining employees after injury or illness, mental health conditions, and increasing competitive employment. You've had quite a history here with your background. We are so pleased to have you. Thank you for joining us today.
It's my pleasure to be here. I really appreciate the opportunity to speak with you today.
Yeah, and we're also pleased because James, our internship coordinator here on campus, has almost 4 years experience in vocational rehabilitation himself. So I'm just going to sit back here and listen to you guys talk shop like you guys
did
before we started. Like, but I know you have a lot to share with us today about setbacks that you experienced in your career as a student, some of your proudest accomplishments. So we're just ready to hear what you have to share with our students.
Thanks, Michelle.
So Joe, if you don't mind, kind of for our students, just kind of giving a background, more of an insight into your background and maybe with your time with Westminster and what led you into getting into voc rehab and having the career set that you did.
Okay. I originally was headed down a pre-med field. I come from southeast Missouri and had father and grandfather were both physicians. My mom was a nurse anesthetist, so that medical thing was sort of in the house. Mm-hmm. I even spent some time as an orderly in a surgery during high school. So I was really comfortable in that, but I was having some trouble studying organic chemistry, more than just normally trying to remember all this stuff. Mm-hmm. And I ended up my sophomore year being diagnosed with something called retinitis pigmentosa, where I was told I was told I'd be blind by 35 and there was nothing they could do about it. Goodness. So I returned after the holiday break my sophomore year to Westminster and was just trying to figure out how to stay focused in what I needed to do. It took me off track from the medical, going into medicine, and I looked around for some other things, and I was challenged by one of my fraternity brothers to try some volunteer opportunities. So my fraternity, SAEs at the time, we had a major community service activity every month, so I started getting involved in those. And then I got to be a volunteer at the state mental hospital on the youth ward, and that was pretty interesting. And then later, the school started something called sociotherapist, which was a 4-hour psych class, but it was also spending 20 hours working at the mental hospital on the youth wards from 6 to 10 at night. Wow. And you were were assigned some of the young people that were out there. And I began to think about their lives and my life, and I knew that I had a sort of uncertain future, but I also had family support. I got a lot of support from the fraternity and the school at that time. And what these kids were facing was, I thought, much worse their future opportunities were much worse than mine. Even though I was going to at some point be blind, they just had very little resources. In today's world, most of those young people would not have been in the mental hospital. So it gave me some perspective, which was pretty important in my life. It's where I developed the concept in my own mind that everybody has something they have to deal with, something they have to address. Mine was just a little more focused. I was a little more certain what was in front of me. I also began to wonder, how could the futures of these young people be better? What could we do differently? So those kinds of volunteer things led me to getting into psychology. And Dr. Rimley was my advisor. And the fraternity, the guys really helped me through some of this dark time. I was a little, let's just say, unfocused for a while. I wasn't the easiest person to get along with, tried to regroup, and it just was dark. And then Dr. Rimley would keep me focused on what I needed to do in school and would help me with some support when that was needed. So all that together kept me moving forward. And then the volunteer work helped me get the perspective I needed. And then I think I found my passion, which is something I would encourage everybody to do when you're casting around. You've got to find your passion and what you really want to do. There was a very wonderful woman that worked in the office there at Westminster named Sally Reynolds. And I was home on spring break, getting ready to get in the vehicle and go to Florida with some fraternity brothers, and she called me at home and said, there's this thing called the National SAE Leadership Foundation Internship. I think it'd be great for you. So we talked about it. She helped me complete the application over the phone. And so I ended up going to South Carolina for a paid internship my senior summer after I graduated. And that gave me a perspective of the drug issues that were out there, and what one could do. This was a community response to a drug problem in Columbia, South Carolina. And I also learned about the importance of stepping up and being a force for innovation from that particular effort. So those kinds of things are really how I got started. I stumbled into actually the woman who was my supervisor when I got to South Carolina. His husband was in vocational rehabilitation. He was a counselor. Dean Fuller, who was a professor in the psych department as well, I think he was the dean of students, is the first person that mentioned vocational rehabilitation to me. So when my supervisor said to me, you might want to think about vocational rehabilitation, they've got a slot in the master's program. I said, I'll take that slot. So I stayed in Columbia. From there, I got to do some drug diversion types of things, and it's really fun to go into a fairly conservative county and try to put in a program that says if somebody got busted for the use of marijuana, we could put them in a program that would help them gain some perspective in their life, and then it would expunge their record. It's not a very it's not a winning argument in very many places. So I learned a lot about program development and how to figure out how to get people to yes. I think learning how to see how people, you got to learn how people make decisions and then package information for them that is tuned into their enlightened self-interest is how I think about it. Why would they want to do this? What's in it for them? Kind of a thing. So anyway, I seem to be rambling, but those are just some of the ways that I got started down this road. And I also found out that I like direct service work. I got trained as a counselor, and I liked the counseling process. I really liked group counseling and structured group experiences. I got to be an expert in that, and I found that to be a really good way to get people to open up and to address some of the things they need to address in this world to be more successful. And so I found a lot of that to be useful to me. I would say that the active listening skills that I learned in the basic counseling classes, the way they were taught in those days, and what I learned about group work applies to meetings and the work I did later in life. because you got to learn group process to understand how do you get to decisions in a group setting and the importance of different people within a group. And the listening skills are just, and one of the things that happens to a lot of people who are trained as counselors when they move up to supervisors, they forget how to do some of the things they learned as a basic, which is just doing that active listening kind of a thing.
Oh, sure.
So those are some things that I think are important.
Well, I mean, I take a number of great things from what you said. Starting with your internship experience, I always go in that area since it's my background. But we currently have students that are still doing internships at Fulton Hospital, and
Excellent.
With a mental health background myself, I always feel with those students, it's really good to have that firsthand experience before getting deep into the field, because it's a time where you're really seeing kind of the ins and outs of working with people in similar situations that like the youth that you're working with and the population at the hospital. So I'm glad that you had that experience and be able to share that too. I feel it's really important for our students to see that, you know, getting into the field, especially in the mental health field, getting that firsthand experience to really see what it's like working with people in similar circumstances.
And you know, it's interesting because right now I'm the positions are called subject matter experts. And after I retired from the state VR agency, I started my own little consulting business. And one of the projects that I have is, and I'm a small part in this, is about helping people with severe mental illness get into the workspace. And it's trying to get various agencies to work together to make that happen. And it's like a bookend thing, because I started off in that mental health, and then now I'm still trying to work specifically towards the employment side of getting people in the, it's like, it's work as recovery is what I think is the best way to say it in a short space. I also, as the assistant commissioner at in the Virginia Rehab Agency, I had a lot of responsibility for providing services to people with mental illness, and it felt good to me after I had seen what was going on at the hospital in 1974 to what we were able to do in 2000s to be able to get people the opportunity to be independent and in their community. And I think you've really got to figure, I think we have more to work to do in that particular area.
Well, Joe, if you don't mind, I know you and I talking before, talking a little shop about Voc Rehab. Do you mind telling our students a little more about what exactly Voc Rehab is and what specifically you did with vocational rehabilitation?
Well, vocational rehabilitation is a national program. Every state has a vocational rehabilitation agency, and some states have two. They separate out the blind agency from what we would call the general agency. And it is designed to have people with disabilities find what they need to be able to be employed. So they would come in, they would go through an eligibility process to determine that they have, there's three criteria basically, to determine that they have a disability that's medically diagnosable. They would also want to be sure that they could benefit from services and that they wanted to go to work, basically. I think those are, in general, the three criteria. And it's about making sure that you can help them find what their skill sets are. You want to get a job that's within their resources, abilities, skills, interests, and you just want to help them understand what the workspace is about. A big part of vocational rehabilitation, they've changed recently, and they have two clients now. They have the consumer as a client, and they have businesses as a client. So they're reaching out to businesses to help them understand how people with disabilities can be excellent employees for them. And I think that there's a lot of evidence that shows that right now people with disabilities are at historic highs in terms of labor force participation. And they didn't drop out during the Great Resignation. They are staying engaged in the workspace. And I think there's a lot of evidence that says they want to work, they show up, and those kinds of things. One of the things that I talk about in rehab and when I'm talking to counselors is through a variety of things, such as the Americans with Disabilities Act, through the advancements in assistive technology, we can level the playing field for people with disabilities. But then I would say that that's not enough. What we really need to look at is what I call looking for an edge. We have to find what it takes to make that individual with a disability the first in line for a job interview. I'm not saying that they have to be get the job, but they need to figure out what it takes to be first in line. So what we're looking at is learning what the businesses want, talking to business about that, seeing what kind of credentialing they're looking for, what's the culture in the business, and then figure out how to help an individual with disability gain those skill sets so that they understand what the skills needed are, what credentialing, and other skills they may need to be successful in that job, and then help them figure out how to get that resume in so that they can be first in line at the job interview. I think providing hope to people is a big job of that vocational rehabilitation counselor. Many, or most of them, have master's degrees. That's changing a little bit now. In rehabilitation counseling or other kinds of closely related fields, they do a lot of work in with school systems now. There's a big move to work with special ed and other youth that have a disability from the school systems. The things that I did the most, well, I worked as a program manager doing, it's called transition, but when I first, you got to remember I've been doing this for a while. So in 1985, when I had the first big grant that I worked on, it was about helping get, back then it was called voc ed, today you'd call it current technical ed, and special ed and vocational rehabilitation to work together. And we were working with youth with disabilities who were special ed kids. And they would come into a facility we had in Fishersville, Virginia, and we would do these hands-on career assessments to help them understand what they liked, what they didn't like. And then we'd also had other kinds of services available, assistive technology, occupational therapy, physical therapy, if there were any other kind of physical issues that needed to be addressed. And we also had them away from home for 10 days. So you got to see what kind of decisions they would make as a young person. And when some of them, it's the first time they are away from home, they're 15, 16, actually 16 years old. And so we were trying to keep them tired because, you know, you just never know what's going to happen. So it was, we would take the information that we gleaned and we would go sit back in their school systems. They came to us from all over the state. Went back to their school systems with the vocational rehabilitation counselor, the special ed, or if they had one, there were just a few in the state then, transition specialists, and the parents and that student, and map out the next 2.5 years towards a vocational goal. So if somebody wanted to weren't sure if they wanted to be mechanic or something else, we would look for a vocational class that they could get into, which wasn't totally easy. You know, it's like collaboration is an unnatural act performed by 2 or more non-consenting agencies. So you've got to get them to work hard together. And again, you're going back to what's in their enlightened self-interest and what's the best for the client. It always comes back to that client. I can tell you, I've done a couple of, one of the other projects I've been involved with is looking at a return on investment on the vocational rehabilitation system. And I've looked at this program twice. And in one of the studies we did, it looked in this first group of students, we tracked them for 10 years in terms of wages and other kinds of programming. And the average person probably earned about $4,000 more a year than they would have made had they not been in that program.
Oh, wow.
From a group that went through in 2000 that we also tracked for 10 years after they entered the program, just by going to this, back then it was a 9-day program, increased their likelihood of being employed by 12%. But then after they went back to school for at least 1 more year, that's as fine as we can, fine and grained as we could get it, you could add 38% to the 12% likelihood of employment. And for those who went on to participate in vocational rehabilitation or continue their participation and head towards post-secondary, the average participant earned twice what they would have earned had they not participated in the program. So that's the kind of impact you can have in vocational rehabilitation if you're working closely with other groups and you are taking the time to make sure that these individuals understand their skill sets and how it applies in the workspace, and then find and connect them to the employment they need.
I think it's really, really exciting to hear about all the collaboration that you had done with working with VR. I remember during my time there, that was always one of my favorite parts is working with our community programs or with the schools and various agencies to help our clients. Do you mind kind of going into a little more detail on directly what you did for collaboration with different agencies and different groups?
Well, I moved up to an assistant commissioner role, which meant my boss was the commissioner, and that was the agency head, and then they reported up to a secretary. And this is in the Commonwealth of Virginia. And a lot of what I did was represent the agency in meetings with special educators. By then, transition had become a big deal. One of the first big grants we wrote was on a statewide systems change grant in Virginia. I was probably a co-director on that. And it was with special ed, and we were working hard to be sure that we were working together. We started, we'd started a transition forum in the state, and it started with about 150 people. So through this grant, we grew it from 300 people to 600 different people coming together. And the whole essence of this meeting, it was a 2.5-day forum, was to showcase programs where people were working together. So my role in this was to figure out how do you put together a program that taught others how to do this kind of transition programming that crossed agencies. And a lot of things happen in a local level where the innovation truly does come up from people who are motivated and who have a passion for the work. And so just to help them figure out with others how they can how others could implement something similar. So those are the kinds of things that I did a lot of. I later became, I at one point was looking at the workforce system, which was just developing the American Job Centers and getting VR to be a part of that process. For a while, VR didn't want to be a part of that process. And VR means vocational rehabilitation I get into acronyms. So I apologize for that. So I would spend some time working with the people that run these agencies, and it didn't hurt that one of their big conferences was at a very nice place in December to go to. So, but you would have the opportunity to see what the things that they thought were important and share some of them that what we thought was important. I think one of the important lessons I learned is there tends to be a group of people in Virginia, anyway, this is how it happened, that say it would be a different topic, but the same people. They represented their agencies. And there were a lot of things that needed to get done, and most of them didn't want to do, and they wanted to do their own work, as they would say. Well, I learned that if I'd volunteered and would help them with projects and get the projects done, then at that point, I was able to have more influence inside these groups. And my goal was to be sure people with disabilities were included in any program that was being developed. And this show up and do the work kind of a thing really does make a difference when you're talking to people. And it goes back to studying how people make decisions and what is in a particular agency's enlightened self-interest. I became a student of that. And by working at it from this perspective, I could get in and influence a group and make sure that people with disabilities, issues and needs were at the table when we were doing that. And the other piece that came out of that is everybody had a product that was better. That's the goal. You've got to make sure every agency has a better product when you're doing something like that.
Joe, I want to ask you too. I know one of the pieces that we kind of talked about briefly before is the advocacy piece. I know as a VR agency, you part of what you're doing is advocating for your clients. But what do you recommend for maybe a student or someone going into the workforce that is needing help with advocacy? What do you recommend? How do you recommend they go about it?
You know, sometimes you feel like you're one of the things that if you've got a vocational rehabilitation counselor or you're working with somebody like that, practicing how to ask for an accommodation, understanding the ADA requirements, because they really can't ask you about it in the interview. But, you know, when I walk into an interview, they're going to know because I'm going to ask for some accommodations in that interview. But understanding yourself well enough and learning how to be comfortable asking for the accommodations you need, because what you are really doing, one of my projects was with the Virginia Manufacturers Association. We put a staff person down in their offices, so whenever they would travel around to their members, they were taking a person from our project with them. And I was talking to them about how we can help with accommodations and assistive technology. And this one gentleman who's an expert in manufacturing and manufacturing flow looked at me and says, Joe, what you're describing to me is what we call lean manufacturing or lean processes applied to manufacturing. And what that basically means is we're working very clearly to make sure that a process is faster, reduces waste, time is considered waste, or in some other way improves the overall throughput of a particular manufacturing process. Assistive technology to him was just one way of looking at that and saying this person could be more productive if they have these things. And it's not unusual to see an accommodation for one person in a manufacturing site becoming an accommodation for many people in that manufacturing site because it made things more efficient. You could see that with some closed circuit televisions in some places. There's a lot of stories about that, and we just had to teach the manufacturers that what we were doing was trying to be helpful. In the same space, an individual needs to learn their own skill sets and be comfortable asking for what they need or having what they need. I have been in meetings. Now, how do I say this tactfully? I have been in meetings with people, and because I'm trained as a counselor, I look at people when I talk to them. It is not unusual for people not to understand, if they haven't been around me very long, that I'm blind. Not even occurred to them. I was in one meeting. I'd been in 3 meetings with these people for 2 hours of meeting, and at the end of the meeting, somebody was pointing something on the blackboard or whatever was up there. I think it was a computer screen projector, and I finally asked her, I said, are you pointing at something? And she said, yes. Well, could you describe it to me? She had no idea. I've been sitting there with her for a total of 6 hours that I was blind. So one of the things I've learned to do is to make it known to people the things I like or that help me in a meeting to be successful. I don't always get it. You know, I need things in advance. Webinars, they should be sending things out in advance so I can read whatever handouts are going to do, and I don't have to worry about it, because on a Zoom, if you share a screen, I can't read it. My screen reader won't read it. So there's just certain things like that you have to help people learn how to do. And it's not that they don't want to do it, they just don't know what they need to know. So if you can become a bit of a technical expert, helping people understand what might be useful. There's a lot of different assistive technology out there. Most of it is not very expensive. And most other people, if they need something, can get it. So you've got to be comfortable, understand what it'll do for you, be able to present that, in my opinion, and then learn how to ask for it in a way that's respectful but somewhat assertive.
Yeah. I have a question for you. I've met with students in my office that were referred to me from the Learning Opportunity Center here on campus, which is a wonderful resource for students who may have a disability to learn or They might be on the spectrum.
Uh-huh.
I've had students ask me in the past, should I disclose my disability? And I always tell them it is a completely personal decision. What advice would you give to a student listening today? How do they make that decision? Is there like a mental checklist on whether or not to disclose? What would you tell that person?
This is an ongoing discussion, I would say. And I had hoped to be able to meet with some of the students from the Learning Opportunity Center when I was on campus a couple of weeks ago. I would say it's what I personally think you're better off with people knowing, particularly on the spectrum. It was interesting. My thesis my senior year was on autism in 1974. And then in 2014, we put together a vocational rehabilitation grant with Virginia Commonwealth University here in Richmond. I was a part of the team that did that to do some research on how to create some services for that population. And those students, most of them are going to be noticeable, but that's not always the case. And I would say that's a part of what I was saying. There's some self-advocacy training programs that are out there that will go through this question with people because it's truly an individual thing.
Yeah.
My personal belief is you're better off with people knowing. A concrete example for me is if I'm in an airport and I'm just standing somewhere, I'm going to have my blind cane out because without that, if I'm standing there and people bumping into me, they just think I'm rude. They see the cane and all of a sudden, oh, I understand. It can be the same for some behaviors that people have. People might think that they're being rude or there's something going on that they don't quite understand, versus if they understand the disability and how it affects itself in the workplace, they might be totally comfortable with it. But that's a tough decision for anybody to make. I have seen some people who just are not going to go down that road, so then they don't want to let anybody else know. It's a very private thing for them, so then you just teach them the best you can how to be appropriate in the workplace. You know, what's the culture like in a business, and then how do you stay within that culture? At least that's my advice to folks. I didn't answer your question, but it is, as you said, very personal, and you've really got to respect that. And there are some checklists out there that will go through the pros and cons of that. And I think our self-advocacy training will do that.
And because I know there's hidden disabilities or challenges that people experience that are covered under ADA, which are like PTSD, ADHD, and some of these things that don't present themselves physically, but it's going on in their brain, the mental aspect, or even just the circuitry. They're not walking around with a cane or have a wheelchair.
The hidden disabilities.
Hidden. Yeah. So thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, and that again, it's a challenge for some people, and they need to making that choice, and they just need to, I think, weighing the pros and cons and talking it through. It's quite honestly, some workspaces are more accommodating than others, more tolerant than others, and that's part of when I'm talking about looking for an edge. You need to understand the culture of a business before you help somebody go apply for a job there to be sure it's a good fit, because it can be a good fit. We got into the manufacturing, and one of the things we did for some of our students who wanted to get into the manufacturing, we created a course that was put together by the Virginia Manufacturers Association for their members. And we hired somebody that was a senior production engineer from Hershey to train these students. He didn't know anything about disabilities. He learned pretty quickly. And we found that the young people that came through it, I'm going to be very general here, with autism, did the technical side of it excellent in an excellent manner. They learned this stuff. It was really pretty quick. But they didn't understand collaboration and teamwork very well, many of them. So we created a 2-week pre-class before they came in to say, here's why teamwork's important, here's how you do it, here's, just sort of to get them comfortable with the concept of working in a team, because that's the way a lot of manufacturers work. And we found that if we ran everybody through that 2-week class, they all did better. So it's one of those things that you start out for one group, but the issue is you learn things where the skill set may be missing, and then you put something in place to help address that skill set. We had an occupational therapist and a behavior analyst working with us on that, so that we could teach them the kinds of things they needed to be comfortable with that part of the job requirements.
Well, thank you. I think we're wrapping up our time here today, but I wanted to give you the chance to share anything that we didn't get to today. Is there any issue or piece of advice that you would like to share with our students before we go?
I would say, I think one of the most important things is to use volunteer work and other kinds of things and early work experiences to find your passion. Because if you are passionate about a particular subject or topic, you're going to find it easier to stay focused in it. If you get into your first year at work, look for a mentor, somebody who can help guide you through what you need to be looking at as you go through the job. And once you get settled in, start thinking about a 5-year plan and projects that may help you get to the 5-year plan and gain the skills you need so you can continue to grow in your position.
Well, Joe, go ahead. Sorry. Yeah, you're good. We can't thank you enough for taking your time out of the day to meet with us. I feel this conversation could go 2 hours or so just with your experience and being able to. I love talking about VR. Just very passionate about the VR mission, and
me too.
The work you've done. I'm still just really wrapping my head with everything you've done for VR. So. Thank you for taking the time out of your day to give some great insight for our students and to help with again, outside of the VR end, but the skill sets that they're going to need to be successful with their career and even on with advocacy. So we're really appreciative of it, and we're really excited for students to be able to hear your experience.
Well, Michelle and James, it's been my pleasure. I've enjoyed the conversation, and if any of the students want to follow up with me, I'm just give them my email. I have no problem talking to people about this stuff.
Perfect.
We gladly will.
Perfect. Thank you very much. We appreciate all your contribution.
It is my pleasure.